So welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today, as you can see, Gary Wayne is back, and we are going to talk about the occult roots of our beloved or not so beloved holidays. Yeah, Gary, good to see you. How are you?
Very good, and so happy to be back with you and to talk about a subject that I think should be talked about more.
Mm.
And so we better understand the world that we live in, and we understand why we do some of the things that we do. And I
Yeah.
think that hit goes right to my sort of core as being a Christian contrarian. I like to verify as much as I can so I know what the heck is going on. So, yeah, it's going to be a good show.
And for the audience, we just lay it out. What you decide, what you celebrate or
Yeah.
don't, that is your business. It's not mine. I don't care,
Yep.
and I guess
Yep.
Gary doesn't care either.
No, I'm not here, I'm not here to convert somebody to Christianity. I'm here to provide information and let
Yeah.
people decide. And am I a Christian? Absolutely. Um, would I love people to convert to Christianity? Sure, of course. But I think we all have free choice and people can make their decisions. I just hope that we help them make a decision, help them make a decision that they're comfortable with, as opposed to not making a decision and sort of being like a lemming that goes along with society and has no idea why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes when you lay out uh, things like that, some people feel as if you're trying to take something away
Yep.
from them, that
Yeah.
is very dear to their heart, but that is not my intention.
Yeah,
Lay
exactly.
it out, and the decision has to be made on a personal level. End of story.
Yeah. I mean, we live in a world that has sort of things that we take for granted and we have no idea what it connects to. And we just need to know, and then you decide. I mean, but the world we live in is a staged world, and we have imagery that's all over the place. We do certain things on certain days. Our entertainment carries a history and a whole bunch of imagery and things that sort of go with it. And you can decide whether it's good or it's not, but you should know what they're referencing or what they're wanting you to participate in, because I think that we don't understand that we live in a world that is, basically a system that started eons ago and
Mm.
has been carried forth. And it's the same belief system that is all around the world. And so if we understand that it's that old and that it's all goes back to a same root source, it starts to make some sense. And now,
Mm.
whether or not you want to be totally part of that or not, that's for you to decide. So you can become whatever religious nature you want, or you can become agnostic, or you can become secular. You can, but make sure you know why you're deciding what you're deciding and understand that we are peppered with um, a belief system that it sort of permeates everything in our world, from the days of the week to our holidays.
Yeah, exactly. So, before we jump into the first holiday, just briefly, we recently had this hype with the solar,
Oh,
um,
yeah,
what
the eclipse.
eclipse. Sorry, that
It's
word
okay.
was.
Yeah,
And okay, anything was on the table, from alien
yeah.
invasion
Oh, I
to
know.
a rapture, the second coming, and what have you.
Yeah,
So I watched a few, just a few videos, but there was one gentleman who made a video that reminded me a little bit of you, because he said, look, guys, you cannot ignore the rest of the prophecies. And from my point of view, that is not the date when everything happens that
yeah,
you expect now. And then some people in the comment section weren't very happy with him, accusing him of, you are trying to push it further into the future, as if he could.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, so Gary, walk us through that. What has to happen first? Because
Yeah.
I think it must be exhausting. We have seen that so many times over the years. You know, now it's coming, now it's coming because of this, and that. And then, you know, nothing happens, and that must be also a little bit
Yep.
frustrating.
Yep. Yeah. I'm quite impressed by the individual that would come forward and say, there's a chronology from a Christian perspective that's laid down, and you can't jump ahead of the chronology. There are certain things that have to happen, and they happen in a sequence. Are there going to be signs in the end time? Absolutely. So I took a lot of heat before, and not too much for people coming back and saying you were right afterwards. And it's not that I don't think that, having an eclipse isn't a wondrous event, because it is. I mean, it's something that is absolutely unique and spectacular. But it's following all of the laws of the universe,
Mhm.
and it's predictable. And that some people were saying this is part of the 3 days of darkness, that they're talking about other eclipses as they're trying to group them together, and that there would be, all sorts of earthquakes and fallout. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous how far it was going. So will there be signs in the end time? Sure, there are. Are we in that end time? Possibly, but not in the last 7 years. And if we are in the fig tree generation, or the godless generation, as Second Timothy talks about, and or the days of Noah, and a generation that's specifically targeted when all things are going to take place, we are not very close to the end of that generation yet. I mean, depending on how long you want to define a generation. So a generation is 40 years, 70 years, or 120 years. And we have to keep all of those numbers in mind. In Genesis 6:3, define life lasting to 120 years. So it could be whatever your start date is for the fig tree generation. It could be as long as 70 years. Um, if we're in the fig tree generation, I would suggest it would be likely, in my opinion, and speculation, would be the taking of Jerusalem, because you have to have two requirements for that fig tree generation, one being that the southern kingdom of Judah is back in the land of the covenant, and they declared their declaration in 1947 and fought the war in 1948. But the second part is Jerusalem is kind of the epicenter for end time prophecy. So they have to be in control of that as well. And so that happened in 1967. So if I were to be speculating, and I kind of think that if we are, that would be the start date for the last generation. But 40 years, that would mean we're kind of beyond that. 7 years would place it into the 2030s, and there's a lot of things that would have to happen yet, and we're not there. We don't have a world government. We don't have a universal religion. We don't have this 10 king empire. So there's so many things that yet have to be built. So it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some catastrophes. So I would place us in the time of the sorrows, which is the birth pangs, and that there are four major calamities that will happen in that last generation. And those are wars and rumors of wars, pestilence, famine, and earthquakes. Are we seeing a rise in earthquakes? Yes. We're starting to see wars and rumors of wars continue. Yes. We had a pestilence. Do we expect more? Sure. And will famine be coming out of a lot of these, and I would call them contrived, self-imposed catastrophes, that they have to get stronger and start working together. And they're the same catastrophes that are going to be in Revelation 6, with the seals, and in the trumpets, and with the wrath bowls. It's just getting stronger in proportion. And so we're going to have a lot of people jump ahead of the chronology. So you have 25% destruction of the world and the people in the seals, 33% in the trumpets, and what would be 100% unless Jesus would come and step back in. So if we had a combination of pestilence, earthquakes, war, famine that wiped out 10% of the population, people would say that's the end of the world. But there's more to come. So expect a lot of people to say, well, no, they're not separate. You don't have that, and try and reinvent what Scripture says, except that they have to manipulate what it actually says to do that. And so be aware of that. And will there be signs in the end time? Yes, there will be signs in the end time. Heavily weighted to the last 7 years, but I would expect some signs beforehand. Will the people that run this world use things like the eclipses and things that they could predict or contrive for their signs in the skies and things like that? Yes, and they will use that to sort of drive people into the world religion and the world government of the 10 King Empire. That is the platform for Antichrist coming to power at the midpoint of the last 7 years. But from a Christian perspective, that's not the signs that we should expect. And the Bible actually provides us signs that comes from the God Most High. And as a sign coming from the God Most High, it shouldn't be something that anybody could be able to predict, like an eclipse, which we can if we understand the laws. And it would be, if it was the days of darkness that they were talking about, it would be like what was done in the time of the Exodus. And when Moses was trying to free Israel, it was 3 days of solid darkness, something outside the laws, something that the gods couldn't do from a Christian perspective, but only the creator God of everything could do that. It would be something like the sun standing still long enough for Joshua to complete a war, right? In that day, outside the laws, it would be something like the Bethlehem star that is totally out of sync with the procession of the stars that would be signaling the birth of Jesus. It would be something like the earthquake and the sun going darkness and the other things that are associated when Jesus died. It would be something that you couldn't explain through science or through the ability of what the gods of lesser powers and the God Most High would have. So we ought to be very careful about this. Is there a good possibility that there's going to be 3 days of darkness down the road? Yeah, you can make a case that, the 3 days of darkness during the seals, trumpets, and wrath bowls at different time frames in the last 3 years would be 3 days of darkness because of the wars and the blocking of the sun with the dust and the stuff that's going to blow, cover the atmosphere, but those aren't successive. If there is a 3 days of darkness, it's going to be during second Exodus in the second half of the last 7 years, because it would be nothing new under the sun. What was will be again, and we will see a second Exodus again, and you will see similar types of miracles for them, greater miracles than what was done the first time. So be very, very careful with this, and that we want to be watching as to what's going on and what's motivating the politics of what's going on, as opposed to the superficial things that they tell us and are misleading as to what the true desire for the outcome is and why they're doing it. So they own the media. They own every aspect of social media, and they control that message. And I would encourage people to be contrarians and verify things as best you can yourself, because none of the times and none of the things that they do make sense. So that if, let's say, you're President Biden and you're in this perpetual war against Russia, you're not trying to win the war.
No.
You're just, what's the real agenda there? Or if now you're going to try and continue the slaughter and aggravation in Gaza because you don't want to send weapons to finish the job that you said they could do in the beginning, what's causing that? What's the agenda there? Well, part of it's perpetual war, part of it's to get us to that government, but you have to understand why he's doing it and who's telling him to do it. So we need to be more contrarian, is my point of view, and particularly with these events like eclipses. And even I think the polytheist false prophets, according to the Bible, will have miracles and great signs that would be greater than that. It would have to be something that would catch your attention, but something that they would have the ability to create.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you for that. So, shall we start with the big ones?
Sure. For what I would what I would do first is sort of take a back step before we go through them and get
Okay, good.
people to understand a little bit more of how the world kind of works.
Mhm,
And so, people are familiar maybe with the term the seven wandering stars in the Bible. And that
mhm,
sort of lines up with the 7 days of the week and the seven major sort of gods of each of the pantheons. And again, it's more of an allegory of the gods, because a lot of these ones would be like offspring gods versus the parent gods. But like they use the planets, for example, like in the Roman pantheon, you have Saturn, Jupiter, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. But in Greece, you have that as Kronos, Zeus, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Aphrodite, and Ares. You have that same usage all the way through the different pantheons around the world, because it's that base old religion. So, and that's the religion that's basically dominated our history. Different vernacular rituals, names for the gods, some nuances to it, but the same religion. And monotheism was sort of separate from that, but never dominated the world. It was all like this island, as what Israel would be understood prophetically, in the sea of Gentile nations. And so, even though Christianity has gotten fairly popular, it has been sort of hijacked into um, do their types of celebrations and adopt the celebrations of the ancient polytheist religions. So, if we understand that there are 8 Sabbaths of the occult in all religions all around the world, and these are their holy days and they have special dates for them and special festivals for them, it starts to make sense of how we see some alignment with how Christians get involved with these holy Sabbaths of polytheism. And so you've got the 4 major points that people would understand, like the 2 equinoxes in March and in September, and then the 2 solstices in December and July. And then they divide that in 2. And so 6 weeks later, usually starting, it could be late in the month, depending on how the zodiac's progressing, or early in the next month, but usually starting about the first of the month, or 6 weeks after the solstice. So about would be the first week of the month. So if you look at Christmas and the solstice, that's using the solstice date of December 21, you have a February 1 date, and then you have kind of a period there of up to 14 days where there's various festivals that might take place. And so you would have March 21, and then 6 weeks later, it would be May 1st. So you have all through there, you have these 8 special days associated with 8 special gods or goddesses and specific rituals. So with that as an overlay, and there's different names all around the world, but the one that you'll find if you sort of Google it is you have starting in December, you have Yule. And this is essentially more the Celtic version that you'll see on the internet. So it's, and then you have the second one that's starting at about the 1st of February. That's called Embolic. And then the equinox is Ostera. And then the 1st of May is Beltane. And then June 21 is the solstice of Litha. And then you have August 1st, Lugnaza. And then in September, you have Mabon. And then at the end of October, 1st of November, you have Samhain. And then starting over in Yule. And they call that the Wheel of the Year. And it's associated with the solar worship of the sun and the cycle of the wheel, of not only the zodiac and the 12 archons represented in the zodiac as the sun moves through it in periods of time up to 2,300 years, and the yearly cycle. And it's the worship that has come down through the nobility, who are the divine representatives from the fallen angels that continue this wheel worship. And so most of the holy sites were put on a wheel circuit type of thing. And if you look at that word Gilgal in Hebrew, which means wheel, you have that associated with specific pilgrimages of worship throughout the year, typically the 8 sites and 8 wheel sites. So one of the most famous ones, particularly that might be associated with Mount Hermon, the Bible, and giants, so to speak, would be Gilgal Raphaim, which is the wheel of the giants located at the foot of Mount Hermon. And it's one of the more holy sites of both before and after the flood. And that there would be a circle or a circuit that they would go around, kind of like how judges, when they first came about, had a circuit. So when you hear the circuit used with judges, it's kind of a similar kind of thing. So the priests or the ministers and the pilgrimages would go around in this circuit of celebration. So it's part of the wheel and the sun worship and the moon worship that's more associated with the mother goddesses. So the first which holiday would you like to start with first based on that?
Um, yeah. Let's start with Christmas.
Sure. So that is called Yule on that. And of course, Yule is associated with you, YEU as we get it transliterated into English. That is the guardian of the spirits that are waiting in preparation for rebirth. So that's kind of one of the spirits behind it. And in December 21 is obviously the solstice date that gets centered around. And this is the start of the light coming back to the earth and the start of regeneration and a whole bunch of other things in it. And from the Norse understanding is and that being Celtic as well, Tuatha De Danann, of the variety that migrated up the Danube River into Germany and continued into the Northland. So the Germanic connections are obviously very, very similar because they're part of the same sort of migration and religion. And so Yule is comes from a Germanic word Yol, Jol, which means feast of the sun. So the feast of that start to go forward, and or Yule Fader, which is Yule the Father, and it's a celebration that is centered around the feast days or the hunt of Odin and the 12 days of Christmas, which is all part of this feast. And the Odin is the horn god that is, the celebration that is centered, around Christmas. So when we look at how Christmas is adapted into this 12 days of Christmas, so to speak, or Odin's hunt, it comes through other religions around the world. And it begins with the Roman Church being part of the Roman Empire with Constantine.
And
And so
how does Krampus tie in there? Because the 12 days of Christmas, that also deals with Krampus,
it
the
does.
so-called evil twin.
Yeah, he's like the evil Santa Claus, right? As
Yeah.
we sort of understand it. So yeah, Krampus is and the elves that associate with them aren't these cute little elves. So you have, like in polytheism, this micro dualism. You have the white hats and the dark hats. So we get two different versions of it. And the German tradition, has this idea of Krampus, who's this horn god of witches, and he's the holly king of winter. And so they're going to come and they're going to kidnap, the elves are going to kidnap children and take them to the other world and do what they want for them. And they leave some coal in the house, or as it's been changed into tradition, into the sock instead of a gift, as a sign that they've taken the taking the children. And Krampen was sort of son of a Norse god of the underworld, right? As you take that back into the understanding. So that would kind of make him Nephilim kind of like, as a son of a god, and would be more like a Hail El type of understanding, as the god of the underworld in German would be Hel. And Hallel, Heylel, is the word for Satan that's translated as Lucifer in Isaiah 14. And Hallel would be more of a king of Babylon allegory. It's a derivative as an allegory for the king of Babylon in Hebrew. And he would be a giant son of a god as an offspring. And so you had, in the time of Constantine, you have that sort of marrying up with St. Nicholas and other types of associated things that's going to start to bring it together. But the start is with Constantine and the search for a celebration for the birth of Christ. And they pick December 25 because he's doing an homogenization of Christianity, Mithraism, and also some Egyptian overlay on there as well to unite the empire. And so in the Mithra mythos, he is born as on December 25. And Mithra is a branch religion of the Indo-Aryan religion shortly after the flood that we would understand as Zoroastrianism. So it's a branch of that. And so again, you have that Mithra December 25 date as part of that religion as well. And so you have other gods in other religions that are associated as son of God being born in other religions as well. So that's a constant in the polytheism, but it's not the date that Jesus would be born on, unless the Bible is in complete contradiction to what we can see. And I don't think so. And for me, I don't care. I don't, well, that's a poor way of saying it. You know, if people want to worship the celebration of Christ on Christmas Eve and Christmas, that's fine. But understand everything that surrounds it, including the Christmas tree, is polytheistic. So make sure you understand that you're participating in the ritual. So choose to participate in that whole festival or not. And if you're a Christian, it's okay to celebrate the birth of Christ, but try and keep it more centered from within your belief and what else you want to do. And so Jesus is born biblically probably in late September or early October. And we know this because all of the animals, the sheep and the goats and the domesticated animals aren't in the stables as they would be in the rainy season in December. They're still in the fields, and the angels are going there to announce the proclamation of Jesus's birth, not to the stables, but to the fields where the shepherds are in. And that also explains why there was a stable available for Mary. There wouldn't have been if it was in the rainy season. So we should look for, and some people will say more early October. I'm a little bit, let's include a period that sort of makes sense and sort of might line up with John the Baptist's birth in about March. But anyways, there's probably 3 to 4 weeks within that period that would make sense, but not December 25. And so all of these different things like Krampus and holly and mistletoe is all stuff that is part of the ancient rituals of polytheism. And so even Santa Claus is sort of connected back to this ancient meaning and not St. Nicholas as he's understood biblically. So they do a conflation of the individuals. So, you know, in around Christmas, I spend, you know, about an hour going through all of the details just as people want to know. Um, and there's a lot more to it than that. But I think people start to get the idea that all the things that we imagine about Christmas and the evergreen tree with, you know, representing immortality and the cedar of Lebanon and the bulbs on there as part of the fertility aspect, and then they put an angel at the top as opposed, as that's ruling over it, and they don't tell you who that angel is. And most Christians thinks, well, it must be Michael or Gabriel. But if that was Michael or Gabriel, they would say, take that angel down and do not elevate us up like that. So we need to understand that stars or angels are associated together biblically. So even if you put a star up there, that's allegorical for an angel. Just like you have, like on Paramount, you have those 23 stars of Mount Hermon, or 23 angels of Mount Hermon that are circling a mountain. They're showing you imagery of fallen angels.
Yeah. And also mathematically, it makes no sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Story goes that Jesus was baptized when he was 30. Then he taught for 3.5 years.
yeah,
We know that he was executed in springtime, end of March, beginning of April, depending on where the full moon was at that time.
yeah,
So if you are 33.5 years old, there's no way that you were born in December.
yeah, yeah. Just doesn't add up. So,
Mm.
and I mean, even if you look at Santa Claus, we need to understand that is a major god being represented in a chariot, and that these horned reindeer are just an allegory for a unicorn. That it would be depicted in Greek mythology, pulling Apollo or Zeus or any of the other gods in these chariots. And just as we look at a cherubim as pulling the chariot in the Bible, in the vision in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, you have one of those heads of a cherubim, which would be an ox or a bull, and you would have the horns attached with that, right? So this is of the polytheist version of the chariot of God in the Bible, but they're distinct in the meanings. They look kind of similar, but one's from a monotheist belief system, one's from a polytheist belief system, and I think people should decide for themselves which one is more accurate. I think it's a counterfeit of everything monotheistic by the polytheists, but that's my biases.
Yeah. And what do you make of the fact that Santa is also an anagram for Satan?
Yeah, it is. And they get at that by the word sort of saint, but they can't use saint, but they can start with saint uh, as the word, but then take another version of it from, whether or not it's Spanish, and then adapt that and say, well, it's the same word as Spanish for saint. So what if we use that word? But yeah, I mean, part of the polytheist belief system is to do anagrams and to encode allegories and meanings in those anagrams, just as everything else associated with it is um, an allegory for their belief system. And you need to be an adept to get into all of those different kinds of allegories.
Hmm. Yeah.
And and Odin is the chief god, right? So of course that would be associated with that from a Satan perspective.
Yeah. So yeah, has actually nothing to do with Jesus.
No, it doesn't. It does not. It doesn't mean we can't have a good time that time of year. Just understand what you're participating in and what you're not participating in. And the Saint Nicholas, he was born in about 280 AD, that they conflate this with. He was a bishop, and he was called shortened Saint Nick. That's where you get that version of Santa Claus as Saint Nick. Um, and what he did, well, there's a lot of miracles that are associated with him, but he gave gifts on December 6th, not December 25.
Yeah, that
Uh,
is when we here in Germany celebrate Nikolaus.
yes, that's the original day.
Mm.
And it comes by Henry VIII in the Commonwealth or the English nations, and he's in power, and he moved it from December 6th to December 25 as well. So you have several different forces throughout history trying to align Christmas with the birth date of Mithras. And of course, Henry VIII is your typical royale. Why would, of course, he would do that, as opposed to honoring if the St. Nicholas tradition is literal history or not. Instead of honoring it on that day, it's been moved to again just wrap it into a polytheist feast celebration.
Mm. Do you have, I don't know if you even celebrate that in Northern America. Here we have a tradition, it's called St. Martin, where the little children, they
Yep.
walk around with lanterns, and then there usually there's a parade, and the parade is led by a guy in a Santa Claus
Yeah.
costume.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. They're
do you know
parading
what that is?
yeah, I think they're parading their children out to be taken by these dark elves,
Ah,
right,
okay.
to the other world. That's what I think is going on with that. And because on that night they're out there looking for uh, these people and the children to take to the other world. And, it's called the Night of the Ghosts and the Demons. It's similar to the lanterns and jack-o'-lantern of Samhain or Halloween. So, yeah, I think there's a direct connection there is just to make it easier and almost as a child sacrifice so that these demons that are out there that's part of the festival aren't going to harm people. And very much associated to how servants were given up in Samhain. And another term that's used in Christmas is Kringle as another name for Santa Claus, but not as a Santa Claus outfit, but let's say like the Clark Kent for Superman in that sort of way of writing, right? Well, that's German Christkindl,
Mhm.
which
Das
means
Kindle,
Christ
yeah.
child. Yeah, Christ child. And what they've done is they've uh, combined that with their, because it's a global understanding with the occult, and they're trying to unite all of these different things with Krishna as being the Christ child. And Krishna was the avatar of Vishnu, the avatar, just as the Christ consciousness will be the same type of thing in the end time with the polytheist dragon messiah, as I would call it. And so look for an avatar effect. And another avatar of Vishnu was Buddha, provided wisdom. And so again, all they're doing is they're mixing um, the different religions and different angles that all the adepts know the linkages between the religions, so they understand it sort of perfectly from that perspective. So yeah.
Yeah, okay. So now, New Year's Eve. Here in Germany, we call it Silvester.
Yeah.
And
The Avesta.
no, Sylvester.
Oh, Zilvesta. Okay.
And there was a pope by the name Sylvester, and he died on the 31st of December in
Oh,
335. I don't know from the top of my head, but in the
yeah.
300s.
Yeah.
So, and people celebrated that. So, and you know what? Actually, it doesn't make sense to me at all. It never did to have, the beginning of the new year in the middle of winter. What nonsense is that? Why don't we have it in the spring? It makes much more sense.
Well, and it sort of used to be in the
Yeah,
spring,
yeah.
but more associated from a kind of a lunar calendar. And so that whole period of the time of just before December 21 and moving into the end of the year is all part of that same festival. And so it's the start of the period of the sun coming back. So that would be more of an understanding that way, I think, of including New Year's into it. And it was a Greek tradition as well, to the Greek religions, that was the start of their year based on their version and Apollo and Zeus, and as it intermixes into that whole period of time.
So would you say is that this New Year's day is that what is it really celebrating?
Yeah, it's like I say, I'm trying to remember as to what New Year's Day is as it relates
I
to
mean,
the Greeks and it being adapted to that, but my memory sort of is not clear on that right now, so I don't think I want to speculate.
yeah, so I know, for instance, that this habit of fireworks,
Yep,
that is dealing with, chasing bad spirits away for
yep,
the new year.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of it as well. And it's also got to do with the songs that they sing. And there's, again, it is a religious tradition. Um, but it's kind of slipping me what the connect all the dots on that is there today. But it's part of that larger celebration is kind of what, I think we want to understand about it, and part of including the different pantheons around the world so that the days sort of match up and things like that.
Mm. So, shall we do Easter?
Sure, we can. And in between Easter is the time of Valentine's Day, February
Oh
1 to about
yeah,
the
yeah.
14th.
I thought we do the big
The
ones first.
in-betweens? Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And so the first thing you notice about Easter, March 21 as the equinox, and kind of more associated, the equinoxes are associated with the mother goddess versus the parent god, or the male gods. And notice there's always two female goddesses in that seven. Um, so Ostara is, it represents the goddess Astaroth. So Ostara is just a transliteration of Easter, Astaroth, Astarte, and again, part of the Queen of Heaven sort of understanding of the celebration. And so the Easter festival is done on a solar basis versus the Passover that would be more traditionally associated in the first month of the year as the lunar calendar would start, the spring, and that's why we have different dates for the Passover than the sort of contrived date for a Sunday based on a solar calendar. And the old biblical way was to use a lunar calendar, and then they had a way of matching up an extra month over, at certain periods to make sure that their celebration dates didn't get um, out of whack with the time of the year, right? So that's just a different way of doing it. But the solar way was introduced through, Enoch, son of Cain, in the original sort of nature, and the sun worshiping religion, and the introduction of astrology and the allegories coming out of the sun moving through the various the zodiacs through a procession of time. And so things switched over to, well, they didn't switch over to, they were probably right from the beginning, because, those 12 zodiacs are representing the 12 archons of Gnosticism and the 12 major gods of the other religions. That was probably the calendar being used right from the beginning, except for the people that were following God, let's say Adam and Noah and the Israelites, where they were using that lunar calendar. And the Book of Jubilees celebrates that transition from lunar to solar, but the book that the Essenes relished as the most important book and most important book of Enoch, because Enoch, son of Cain, created that solar mysticism that I like to call Enochian mysticism. So that's why you have that sort of disalignment. And this is the goddess of the dawn that's being represented in this, and that would be understood as Venus. That's why you have Venus and a mother goddess that's related. And as you take that back to its understanding, is that every fallen angel has a counterpart, as a coexisting ruler. So a female goddess and a male god as they represent the pantheons. Satan sits above those pantheons as the chief angel and most powerful angel, and we won't go into all the different ways about that. And he sits above the council of the gods that rule this earth, and that he would have had a partner as well. So when you see sun gods, particularly with offspring gods after the flood, let's say like Osiris, as is used in the Trinity of Freemasonry, because they're more enamored with the Egyptian pantheon and the name of the gods, although they certainly use Greek and other ones as well and recognize them, but that seems to be the one they use more often than not. You have Osiris that would be understood as an allegory for Satan. Different god, lower on the level, and an offspring god, and lower than Ra before the flood. Just as Zeus would be, the offspring god of Kronos, and Baal of El, and they are sun gods that are an allegory for the chief god. They're doing his bidding on earth as the god of this world, but it's an allegory. And Isis, in that understanding, would be understood as the counterpart to Satan in the allegorical form, and that the counterpart would be known as the Queen of Heaven, which is a standard sort of title, and also talked about in the book of Jeremiah of people sacrificing to the Queen of Heaven. And what's interesting is that Satan is also kind of equated with Leviathan, and that the female Leviathan was killed in prehistory. In all accounts around the world, whether or not it's called Leviathan or Tiamat or Lotan or Verta or all the different names, it's the same accounting. It's just a different god that's killing that in each account, a different name for it. And in biblically, it's Jehovah that does that. Jehovah of the Elohim that kills the god. So the pre-existent Jesus. And so the male one is going to be taken care of in the end time, which would be Satan. And so this is thought to be an allegory of that hidden god that the secret societies also like to hide as the true highest level goddess that they worship, and perhaps the one that Satan is going to worship in secret. I mean, Antichrist will worship in secret, as Daniel 11 talks about. So this seems to be part of the allegory for the worshiping of the partner to Satan or Lucifer, the great architect of the universe, or all the other different names that he would be called. And so it's representing, like a new beginning, like a rebirth, right? And so it's very much associated with fertility, just as rabbits are associated with Easter because they produce so significantly it's just a good allegory for the fertility aspect of it. And that Easter eggs as a fertility, as an egg, is the allegory that permeates Easter as well. And so,
and as we all know, rabbits do not lay eggs.
Exactly. There's no other than that they're trying to conflate different sort of meanings into that ritual. And so the equinox is also understood as the perfect balance of dualism, that perfect timing of light and darkness. So the two equinoxes are symbolizing that as well, but it's really about the reincarnation aspect of the religion, that, you have the darkness that starts on the new year with Yule, and you're going to have these spirits, these that are being prepared for rebirth in the belief system. That's to represent the reincarnation of these dead spirits into other people as they take other human forms and are on their transgenerational evolution to godhood somehow, even though they seem to be degrading in status. It's kind of but that's could be just the superficial meaning of it too. So yeah, I think when we look at how the crucifixion of Jesus has been folded into the Easter festival, it is stunning, and that in polytheism, the mother goddess is the equivalent of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, yeah. So many people say, yeah, Easter has also to do with Ishtar, but I would not get hung up on specific names.
Yep.
Definitely, what you can say is it has to do with fertility goddesses,
Yes,
with
absolutely.
sex and drugs and rock and roll. So
Yep. And queens of heaven are also known as fertility goddesses, and
yeah.
also have a war aspect to them as well. And queens of heaven were also notorious in polytheist accounts of also creating giants as demigods. So let's say Gilgamesh is going to be created after the flood as the son of King Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, probably another Nephilim, as a king there, but through the mother goddess and fertility goddess Nin. So that would be
Yeah.
one of those queens of heaven, fertility goddesses, and notorious for creating the spirits offspring that are the royales that rule the earth.
Yeah. And here in Germany, the connection is actually very obvious because we call it Ostern,
Yep,
Ostern, Ostern. And that comes directly from Ostara, which is
yep.
a Germanic fertility goddess.
Yes. And Astara is generally understood in the Celtic version, and the names that I'm using for Astara is from the Celtic pantheon, but it's so similar, just as a lot of the Celtic deities in England or Ireland or Scotland are very similar to the Tuatha De Danann or Germanic names in sort of spelling or pronunciation. So yeah, it's the same mother goddess that's represented all around the world. So, I think you have like Freya that's also would be up there as well. And of course, what Friday comes from.
Yeah. And we also have the season of sacrifice in which kicks off, around 22nd of March and then lasts until 1st of May. Do you think that they deliberately put the crucifixion there?
Yeah, I think that was purposely done by God to have that done. Um, a- and you would have to have some preternatural ability to do that, because you have Passover that is being started during the time of the Exodus, right? And they're in the first beast empire that raises Israel into a nation. So to have that as part of the time of the crucifixion is amazing when you look at that as being the season of sacrifice, and you have the lamb that's being sacrificed, and lambs and sheep are very much associated with rebirth and sacrifice in most all of the religions, and Jesus is called the Lamb of God. And so I think, yeah, that is, a converging of it. And again, how you want to get there in terms of, who started that time first, or was it always the same type of timing on these celebrations? One is counterfeiting the other. And again, I think it's the fallen angels that are counterfeiting everything that God had laid down and would lay down. But I can certainly understand if you're of the polytheist belief that you could just as easily you could believe the flip side to that. But that's not a coincidence. And so I think the people in this world have done a very good job of making sure that all of those things conflate to that period of time and celebration, so that people aren't necessarily worshiping what they thought they were worshiping with all of this other stuff that's intermixed.
Yeah. Yeah, and the church somehow also did a number on that holiday, because it is not possible that you always die on Friday.
Yeah, it's crazy. But again, what's going on there is a separation of the Roman Church from the Jewish people, who,
Mhm.
for a long period of time, said, they're the one who killed the Messiah, and used that in a sort of derogatory manner. No, they shouldn't have done that, but they're paying the curses of that covenant that's going to be reconciled, and we do need to know that. But by separating the linkage between the festivals of the Bible that Israel celebrated to what Christians are celebrating, leads us to a bad celebration of the crucifixion on every Friday. So, was there a period of time when Jesus was crucified that would have been almost correct? Sure. But we have to understand, in the feasts of the Bible, you have the Passover, which Jesus was taken down for, and the day before you had the preparation day where all the yeast is taken out in preparation for the Passover and for the Feast of Unleavened Bread that would start the day after the Passover with a special Sabbath. So if you lay it down, is you have a special Sabbath, the Friday, the Saturday Sabbath, and the writing, and that puts Jesus 3 days and 3 nights in the earth and in the grave, and the math starts to add up. And if you were celebrating Passover on the lunar calendar that the Israelites did, it would not end up on every Friday.
No.
Or every Thursday. It's just um, a different way of doing it. But again, when you can separate it like that, you can say we can do it on a Friday and a Sunday, and then we can change our Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, the day of the sun, because that's when Jesus rose on. And then just ignore all of the specific details. And the reason why I sort of like to point this out to people all the time is because the Bible doesn't get those kinds of things wrong. It doesn't make math errors, and that all you're doing is seeding doubt into people that, is this really accurate or not? If
Mm.
But if you take it back to the original details, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was, yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing, the days went from dusk to dusk.
Mhm.
So if you factor that in, then the details really line up again as well. So the Sabbath would start on Friday at dusk and go to Saturday at dusk.
Yeah. So do you think they made that detachment from the original date in order to confuse people?
Yeah, to lead them away from Israel, and to say everything that Israel did or represented is they destroyed themselves. And so they are people that should not be honored or recognized. And but what it also did was it elevated the Roman Church to a level of authority and not being held responsible to what was written in the Old Testament.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, that all of that is pretty convoluted, but once you hear it laid out, then it starts to make sense.
Yeah.
So, Gary, believe it or not, our first hour is already gone,
Yeah.
and we are going to see the patrons on the other side. So.
Terrific.